So all we need to do is replace that final sequence of animation with a real spacecraft, and how hard can that be, right? Well, it's so hard that only 3 superpowers have ever done it. The United States, Soviet Union, and in 2013, China. So Moon Express, just to emphasize, is a privately funded company, right? We have investors, mostly from Silicon Valley, but not entirely, that have invested the capital in order to get where we are. We have a partnership with NASA, which is fantastic, but we're not getting government subsidies. We're not getting government grants to do this. This is all risk capital. We're all on the hook for this. We certainly want to turn NASA and other government agencies into customers at some point. But everything to date, this is an entrepreneurial venture. We're very excited last week to announce that, again, we're able to capitalize and stand on the shoulders of giants and take over dormant government facilities that we all paid for down at Cape Canaveral. The launch complexes 17 and 18, very historic. The Pioneer missions, the Mars Phoenix mission, decades of launches of exploration on government spacecraft launched from these facilities. We as a private company have now reached agreement with the U.S. Air Force to take over these facilities and use them as a test range. We're not going to be launching our own vehicles from Earth, but we need, not everywhere can you fly a spacecraft around and test it on this country, right? So Cape Canaveral and the Space Coast is absolutely one of the best places, and we've made our home there as a company. And over the next year, we're going to be testing our spacecraft that you saw, and an evolved version of it that's going to be fitting into a rocket and leaving, if all goes well, for the surface of the moon in 2017. I mentioned that we're partnered with NASA. It's a very important partnership in that the technology that's been developed by NASA is just unbelievable. And the things that NASA was able to do with relatively scarce resources and very smart people, we're able to liberate a lot of that value and learn from it, use facilities and technologies and their expertise. Politically, NASA is not allowed to go back to the moon right now. That might change. But right now, it's the partnerships with the private sector that are making sense in exploration. Just like NASA buys rides from Orbital ATK and SpaceX to put cargo to the space station and eventually humans, NASA needs to procure rides to the moon. When NASA wants to send a package across town, they don't call a government trucking service, they call FedEx. When they want to send a package to the moon, we want them to call MoonX. And it's not just government packages. We have a number of customers, both public and private, with very innovative things to do on the moon. So our short-term on-ramp to a profitable business case of a long-term vision of lunar resources starts with transportation, like it usually does, like in the old days of maritime technology, like in the old days of aviation, where the first aviators got government contracts to deliver the mail. We're going to get contracts to deliver the science instruments. So history will be repeating itself as we expand the economic sphere of Earth with NASA as a partner. But we need a rocket to get there. Late last year, we announced that we have entered a contract with another startup company called Rocket Lab that is boldly offering a new rocket vehicle for $5 million. That might sound like a lot of money, but prior to that happening, we were faced with $50 or $60 million as just the cost of the rocket. Now you can go on the web and put a rocket in your shopping cart for $5 million, so we bought 3. And these rockets have not even launched yet. The first launch of the Electron will be taking place later this year out of New Zealand. By the time that our little spacecraft is on top of one of these rockets in late 2017, we're anticipating that it'll be several, maybe in the high digits, maybe even the low double digits, of successful launches of the Electron vehicle. We're taking a risk, of course we are, but we're not going to be the first, and it's a calculated risk. And space is hard. But with this, what we're doing is we're collapsing the cost so radically that we will be able to democratize access to the moon, just like CubeSats have democratized access to low Earth orbit. Imagine the markets that open up to us as a business when students forget about college and university, that even in high school can now talk about sending instruments to the moon. Wow. And it's not just spending your entire career like it used to be the case for one mission. It's going to be, okay, what mission are you doing this year? And it's going to be an entirely different scenario. So in some ways, the rocket science is the easy part. To paraphrase Wernher von Braun, it's the paperwork that's the hard part. And Deborah alluded to this, that the biggest barrier that we have right now, even though the financing is a huge undertaking, the technology is a huge undertaking, the regulatory part of it is actually the biggest risk right now. Who knew that you needed a license to go to the moon? Well, we do, and it does make sense. When you and I get in the car and go on the highways, the rules of the road are important. We want to make sure that those other cars have been licensed. Somebody's gone through some sort of training, and there's some sort of organized behavior, so everybody can actually do things. So the same thing goes in space. So the idea of many countries, many companies, many efforts going to the moon, to other places, that just needs rules of the road. So there is a treaty signed by over 100 countries in the 60s called the Outer Space Treaty that governs the behavior of nation states in space. And it talks about great things like space being the common province of all mankind. It talked about not putting weapons of mass destruction on celestial bodies. It talked about a lot of the things that were of concern to the world in the 60s, but what it did not talk about explicitly was the private sector in space. Nobody anticipated that part. But it's a well-structured agreement that we are interpolating in our modern day of how does this apply to companies like Moon Express. And Moon Express in April submitted for the first time ever a proposal to the US government to allow us to leave Earth orbit for the first time, and no private company has ever left Earth orbit, ever, right? They've all been government missions. So there's just an absence. There's not a reluctance, it's just an absence of a framework that would allow us to do that. We're not there yet. We are very optimistic, and this article that the Wall Street Journal put out in June anticipated that we're very close to becoming that first company to be approved. So stay tuned, and I'm sure hoping that this town is going to give us a thumbs up for this mission in 2017. This town in D.C., the moon is rising in D.C. We're going to make the moon great again. And we are striving to land on the moon for the first time in history as a private sector in 2017. And my hope is that that will be the space equivalent of the 4-minute mile. And everybody can say, and every person under 20 is going to say, I can do that too. And just like happened with the 4-minute mile, all of a sudden, everybody was doing it. And then it's going to be a different world. We're going to take a selfie for humanity from the moon. All of humanity in one selfie. How's that, right? Not bad. Next, we're going to go back. We're going to go to the South Pole, and we're going to explore for resources. And in our third mission, by 2020, we hope to bring something back and close that business case. And in doing so, for you Star Trek fans out there, we're going to uphold the Prime Directive. One of the most important features of this mission approval that we're looking for is our respect of our own planet and others. In the real world, it's not called the Prime Directive. It's called Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty on Continuing Supervision and Planetary Protection. But we're going to be very responsible when we go to another world. And it's not just the moon that we're talking about here anymore, right? We have other companies like SpaceX that want to go to Mars. And Mars is a much more complex environmental planetary protection scenario. So with all of that, we as a species are now embarking on a evolution probably as important as the first amphibians that crawled out from the oceans to the land. We humans are now crawling out from the planet to the oceans of space. And the future is starting to really look like it should. Thank you very much.